The cold was the only loyal companion Selara had left, which should have been her first warning. She'd learned over the years that when even the wind stopped howling in the northern forests, it meant hunters closing in, and hunters meant death. But she was bleeding, bone deep, her vision blurring from 3 days of running from the shadow pack after witnessing murders she was never supposed to see. The snow beneath her boots had turned from white to crimson miles ago. Each step left a trail any fool could follow, but Selara's half-shifter healing had failed her hours past. The silver-tipped claws that raked her back had seen to that. Her wolf stirred weakly inside her chest, whimpering, dying alongside the body that had never fully belonged to either world. She should have kept running. Should have ignored the instinct that made her pause, one bloodied hand pressed against a towering pine for balance. But the sound cut through the terrible silence like a knife, a small, pitiful whimper, barely audible over her own ragged breathing. A cub. Wounded. Alone. Selara's lips cracked into something too bitter to be a smile. Of course. Of course fate would offer her one last cruel choice. Save herself and run. Or die protecting something even more helpless than she was. The whimper came again, weaker this time, from somewhere beyond the snow-laden evergreens. Her legs were already moving before her mind caught up. She found the cub 20 yards deeper into the forest, collapsed in a hollow between two frost-covered roots. White fur, matted with blood. Too white, the kind of pure, pristine coloring that marked royalty among the shifter bloodlines. Selara dropped to her knees beside the small body, her own wounds screaming in protest. The cub's breathing was shallow, erratic. Deep gashes carved through his side, the work of something vicious and deliberate. He couldn't have been more than a few months old. No, no, no. The words tumbled out unbidden as Selara's trembling hands hovered over the cub's injuries. She had no supplies, no strength, no magic left to give. But she'd been a healer's daughter once, before her mother's pack cast them both out for the sin of her father's human blood. Before she learned that half-breeds were tolerated only as long as they were useful, and discarded the moment they asked for anything in return. She pressed her palms against the worst of the cub's wounds, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat. Too slow. Fading. Behind her, a branch snapped. Selara's head whipped around. Through the swirling snow, a massive shape emerged, rogue, by the feral gleam in his yellow eyes and the madness rolling off him in waves. One of the Shadow Pack's enforcers, sent to finish what they'd started. The rogue's lips peeled back, revealing teeth designed for ripping throats. Thought you'd run farther, half-breed. Should have kept going. Selara's hand found the silver dagger at her belt, her last weapon, stolen from the crime scene that had condemned her. She rose on shaking legs, positioning her body between the rogue and the dying cub. You want him. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, cold as the wind that had finally begun to howl again. You go through me first. The rogue laughed, a sound like breaking bones. Gladly. He lunged. Selara was already moving, ducking beneath his first swipe, and driving the dagger up into his exposed ribs. Silver against flesh. Not enough to kill him outright, but enough to make him scream. They went down together in a tangle of claws and desperation, snow and blood churning beneath them. She felt his teeth sink into her shoulder, felt her own blade find his throat, felt the hot spray of arterial blood as she twisted, using the last of her strength to saw through muscle and tendon until his grip went slack. The rogue collapsed. Selara collapsed with him. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. Couldn't feel much of anything except the numbing cold and the wet heat of too much blood, hers and his, mingling in the snow. Her vision swam, darkening at the edges. With her final conscious thought, she dragged herself back to the cub, curling her broken body around his small, trembling form. At least I didn't die running, she thought, as the darkness pulled her under. At least I chose this. The last thing she heard was the thunder of footsteps approaching through the forest, and a voice, deep, commanding, edged with barely controlled fury, shouting a name she couldn't quite make out. Then nothing. 3 days ago, Selara had made the mistake of taking a shortcut through Shadow Pack territory. 3 days ago, she'd stumbled onto a clearing where 4 wolves stood over the bodies of traveling merchants, their muzzles red with fresh kill and their eyes bright with the kind of violence that had nothing to do with hunger. 3 days ago, she'd locked eyes with the Shadow Pack's beta and understood, with perfect clarity, that she'd just signed her own death warrant. She'd been running ever since. The mountain forests of the Northern Territory offered some cover, but not enough. Not for someone who left a blood trail like breadcrumbs, and whose wolf was too weak to fully shift, too human to fully hide. The Shadow Pack's hunters were relentless, trained to track prey across snow and stone alike. They'd been toying with her, she realized somewhere around the 2nd day, letting her think she had a chance, letting her exhaust herself completely before they closed in for the kill. Now, as the sun bled out behind the mountains and the temperature plummeted, Selara's legs finally gave out. She hit the frozen ground hard, her damaged shoulder striking a buried rock. The pain was distant, abstract. Her body had stopped bothering to report injuries hours ago, too overwhelmed to distinguish between old wounds and new. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Her vision swam with black spots that refused to clear. This was it, then. The end of the line. The final stop on a lifetime of running from one pack's cruelty to another's indifference. She'd always known she'd die alone. Half-breeds always did, but she'd hoped for something cleaner than bleeding out in the snow while her hunters circled closer, savoring her fear. Selara closed her eyes and waited for the mercy of unconsciousness. That's when she heard it. Faint, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable, a high, broken whimper that didn't belong to her. Her eyes snapped open. Somewhere close, something small and helpless was dying just as slowly as she was, and the sound of its pain ignited something in her chest that exhaustion and blood loss couldn't quite kill. That healer's instinct her mother had beaten into her bones, the one that never learned when to quit. Selara's fingers dug into the frozen earth. Her teeth gritted against the agony as she dragged herself forward, inch by excruciating inch, following that pitiful sound into the darkening trees. The cub was impossibly small, curled in a hollow between 2 massive roots like something precious the forest had tried to protect and failed. White fur, not the cream or silver gray of common wolves, but the pure, unmarked white that only appeared in the oldest bloodlines. Royal blood. Selara's breath caught. She'd seen wolves like this exactly once before, in a procession that passed through her mother's territory when she was young. The kind of wolves that commanded packs, that ruled territories, that never traveled alone and certainly never without guards. Which meant someone was looking for this cub. Someone powerful. Someone who would tear apart anyone found near his injured body. The smart thing would be to leave. To drag herself in the opposite direction and let fate sort out whether the cub lived or died. But Selara's hands were already moving, hovering over the deep gashes that carved through the cub's side, assessing the damage with a healer's practiced eye. Internal bleeding, possibly punctured organs, silver poisoning from whatever claws had done this. Hours left, maybe less. The cub's dark eyes flickered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. He whimpered again, the sound stabbing straight through Selara's chest. "I know," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I know it hurts." She was reaching for him, ready to do something, anything, when the wind shifted and carried a scent that turned her blood to ice. Rogue. Close. Selara spun just as the massive wolf exploded from the underbrush, all yellow eyes and foam-flecked jaws. One of the Shadow Pack's enforcers, the kind they sent when they wanted suffering, not just death. She barely got her dagger up in time to catch his first lunge, the force of his body slamming her backward into the snow. They rolled, a tangle of desperation and fury. Selara felt his claws open her ribs like paper. Felt her own blade skitter across his shoulder, too shallow, not enough. He was stronger, faster, uninjured. She was already dying. But she'd been dying her whole life, one rejection and beating at a time, and she'd learned long ago how to make dying last. When he lunged for her throat, she gave him her forearm instead, screaming as his teeth clamped down. Used the leverage to drive her dagger up beneath his jaw, into the soft palate, through into his brain. His eyes went wide. His grip loosened. Selara twisted the blade and held on until his massive body went limp. She collapsed beside him, her vision tunneling, darkness eating the edges of the world. Her destroyed arm wouldn't move. Her ribs grated with every breath. Blood pooled beneath her, melting the snow to crimson slush. With the last of her strength, she crawled back to the cub, curling her body around his trembling form like a broken shield. The forest went quiet again. This time, Selara welcomed it. The sound that shattered the silence was nothing human. It was rage given voice, a roar that made the snow shake loose from the branches and sent every living thing within a mile scrambling for cover. Selara barely registered it through the fog of approaching death, her consciousness already slipping away like water through cupped hands. Then the footsteps came, thundering through the forest with the force of an avalanche. Multiple wolves, moving fast, their combined presence heavy enough to make the air itself feel dense and oppressive. But one presence eclipsed all the others, something vast and ancient and absolutely merciless, radiating power like the sun radiated heat. Selara couldn't even lift her head, could only lie there, wrapped around the cub, as that overwhelming force descended on their hollow. Lucan. The voice was raw, stripped of every pretense of control. Lucan gods. Hands touched her shoulder, impossibly gentle despite their size, and carefully rolled her onto her back. Selara's eyes fluttered open to find a face hovering above her, dark-haired, severe, with the kind of brutal masculine beauty that belonged on ancient statues, not living men. His eyes were storm gray and currently wide with something between relief and absolute horror. Behind him, other wolves materialized from the shadows, shifting into human form as they surveyed the carnage. The dead rogue, the blood-soaked snow, the trembling white cub now being examined by a woman whose hands glowed faintly with healing magic. "He's alive, my king," the woman said, her voice tight. Traumatized, poisoned with silver, but alive. Someone shielded him. The man, the king, looked down at Selara, and his expression did something complicated. His hand was still on her shoulder, and she felt the tremor that ran through his fingers as his gaze tracked over her wounds, her shredded clothing, the silver dagger still clutched in her ruined hand. "You saved him," he said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "Dangerous. You're dying and you saved my son." Selara tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough that brought blood to her lips. The king's jaw clenched. He started to say something else, and then it hit him. Selara saw the exact moment the bond snapped into place. Saw his eyes go wide, his breath catch, his entire body go rigid as though he'd been struck by lightning. The hand on her shoulder spasmed, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise before he jerked back like she'd burned him. "No." The word came out strangled. "No, that's not." But the bond didn't care about his denial. It was already there, blazing between them like a living thing, an unbreakable chain forged in blood and sacrifice. Selara felt it too, even through the dying haze, felt the wrongness of it, the cosmic joke that her mate would be someone like him, someone so far above her station that even looking at him too long felt like blasphemy. The Alpha King stared at her, something like devastation crossing his face. Then he moved. Selara didn't remember the journey. Consciousness came and went in fragments. The sensation of being lifted, cradled against a chest that radiated furnace heat, the blur of trees racing past at impossible speeds, voices arguing in harsh, clipped tones that her dying brain couldn't parse. Pain was the only constant, a red tide that pulled her under again and again. When awareness finally surfaced long enough to matter, she was surrounded by chaos. Stone walls, ancient and imposing. Firelight dancing across vaulted ceilings. Hands everywhere, pulling at her ruined clothing, pressing against her wounds, flooding her body with magic that burned like acid through her veins. She tried to fight, to pull away, but her limbs wouldn't obey. Hold her still. A woman's voice, sharp with command. The silver's spread too far. If we don't extract it now, it'll reach her heart. Then extract it. The Alpha King's voice cut through the noise like a blade, brooking no argument. He was there, somewhere beyond the bodies crowding around her, his presence a weight she could feel even without seeing him. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to drain every healer in this fortress. She doesn't die. Do you understand me? She doesn't die. My king, the bond. If she's truly your mate, we should wait for the ceremony too. She saved my son. The roar made the stones tremble. She's lying here dying because she chose Lucan's life over her own, and you think I'm going to let protocol kill her? You have your orders. Save her. Now. Silence fell, broken only by Selara's labored breathing and the crackle of magical energy as the healers resumed their work with renewed urgency. Then another sound cut through, small, broken, utterly pitiful. The whimper of a traumatized cub. No, little prince, you can't. A guard's voice, gentle but firm. Let him through. The king again, quieter now. Footsteps, smaller ones, padding across stone. Then a wet nose pressed against Selara's dangling hand, and she felt the cub, Lucan, curl against her side, his small body trembling but determined. He made that sound again, not quite a whine, almost a plea. She heard the king's sharp intake of breath. He won't leave her, someone murmured. Your Majesty, we've tried, but he... Then don't move him. The king's voice had gone rough, raw. Let him stay. Through the haze of pain and magic, Selara felt the cub's heartbeat against her ribs, rapid and fierce. Felt the king's gaze on her like a physical weight. Felt the bond between them all, tangled, impossible, terrifying, pulling tighter with every breath she managed to drag into her failing lungs. Fight, the king commanded, and this time he was speaking directly to her, his hand closing around her wrist with desperate strength. Fight, and I swear on my bloodline, on my kingdom, on everything I am, you will have a place here. Both of you. Always. The darkness swallowed her before she could answer. Selara woke to silk. The sensation was so foreign, so utterly wrong, that panic hit before conscious thought. Her eyes snapped open to find herself in a bed large enough to sleep 5, wrapped in sheets that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Firelight flickered from a hearth carved from black marble. Tapestries depicting wolves and ancient battles covered stone walls. Everything spoke of power, permanence, wealth, things that had never belonged to her and never would. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her body screamed in protest, but the pain was distant, muffled, manageable. Healed. Someone had healed her. Someone had stripped her, bathed her, dressed her in a soft linen nightgown, and put her in this room like a doll arranged in a dollhouse. Selara's heart hammered against her ribs. Trap. This was a trap. Pretty cages were still cages, and she'd spent too many years learning that kindness from the powerful always came with a price she couldn't afford to pay. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, testing her weight. Shaky, but functional. The window across the room beckoned, 3rd floor, maybe 4th, but she'd survived worse falls. She took one step, then another. I wouldn't recommend it. Selara spun, and there he was. The Alpha King, standing in the doorway like he'd materialized from shadows, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. He was dressed more simply than before, but the power radiating from him was unchanged, immense, undeniable, suffocating. "The fall would kill you," he continued, his tone almost conversational. "And after the effort my healers put into keeping you alive, I'd rather not have to explain why I let you throw yourself out a window. Let me." Selara's voice came out hoarse but sharp. "You don't let me do anything. I don't belong to you." Something flickered in his storm gray eyes.
"No.
"You don't. But you are my mate, whether either of us likes it, and you did save my son's life. Those two facts make you untouchable in this territory."
Mate.
The word hung between them like a death sentence. Selara shook her head, backing toward the window. "I don't want. I didn't ask for. Neither did I." His voice was quiet, but not unkind. "The bond doesn't care what we want. But you're safe here, Selara. The Shadow Pack can't touch you. No one can. You have my word." "Your word." She laughed, bitter and broken. "I've heard those before. Right before they throw you out for being too broken, too different, too much trouble to keep. I'm not them. Everyone's not them until they are." Her shoulders hit the stone wall beside the window, her fingers already searching for the latch. "Safety's temporary. It always is. Better to leave on my own terms." The king, Riken, took a single step forward, and the movement was so controlled, so deliberately non-threatening, that it somehow made him more dangerous. "You can leave," he said softly. "I won't stop you. But Lucan is sleeping in the next room, and he hasn't stopped asking for you since you collapsed. So before you run, maybe tell me what I'm supposed to say to a traumatized cub who thinks you're the only thing standing between him and the dark." Selara's hand froze on the window latch. Damn him. The cub became her shadow. Lucan followed her everywhere, down corridors lined with ancient weapons, through courtyards where guards trained in formations she'd never seen, into the library where dust motes danced in shafts of pale sunlight. He was small enough that his paws made barely any sound on the stone floors, but Selara always knew he was there. Could feel his presence like a weight against her shins, a constant reminder that running wasn't as simple as she'd wanted it to be. He didn't speak much, not in either form. The trauma of the attack had stolen something from him, left him skittish and prone to nightmares that had him whimpering in the dark. The only thing that seemed to calm him was proximity to Selara, her hand on his head, her voice reading aloud from books she barely understood, her body between him and whatever invisible threats his young mind conjured. It was infuriating, terrifying, heartbreaking. She hadn't asked to be anyone's shield, least of all a prince's. But every time she considered leaving, she'd catch Lucan watching her with those dark, knowing eyes, and the words would die in her throat. Riken, for his part, kept his distance. He'd given her free run of the fortress, every room, every wing, every hidden passage save for the ward chambers and his private quarters. Guards nodded to her as she passed, but never followed. Servants brought her meals without asking what she wanted. It was freedom of a sort, wrapped in the silk-lined chains of protection she'd never requested. The king himself appeared only in glimpses. In the training yard, moving through sword forms with lethal grace. In the great hall during evening meals, conducting business with visiting alphas while Lucan dozed at Selara's feet under the table. In corridors late at night when she couldn't sleep, his presence a dark shadow that never quite approached but never fully left. He was patient. Impossibly, infuriatingly patient. Selara tested the boundaries constantly. Snapped at guards who stood too close. Skipped meals to see if anyone would force her to eat. Spent entire days in the furthest corners of the fortress, waiting for someone to drag her back. No one did. And that was somehow worse than any cage she'd known. 3 weeks into her captivity, Because that's what it was. No matter how golden the bars, Selara found herself in the fortress's inner courtyard, watching Lucan chase snowflakes with the kind of innocent joy that made her chest ache. The cub was healing, growing stronger, starting to trust again. She felt Rican before she saw him, that overwhelming presence settling beside her like a storm front moving in. "He's getting better," the king said quietly. "Because of you." Selara didn't look at him. "I'm not staying." "I know." There was something unbearably sad in those two words. "But you're still here." She had no answer to that. No answer that didn't make her sound like exactly what she was, a coward, too afraid to hurt a child, too broken to accept the gift she'd been given. Rican's hand brushed hers, just barely, before he walked away. The mate bond hummed between them, patient as winter, inevitable as spring. The training yard became Selara's refuge. It started as restlessness, too many days of soft beds and softer treatment, her muscles growing slack, her instincts dulling. She'd survived her entire life on the knife's edge of readiness, and comfort felt like slow death by silk and safety. So she'd found the guards during their dawn drills and simply joined in, daring anyone to stop her. No one did. They'd adjusted their formations to include her, handed her a practice blade without comment, and proceeded to knock her on her ass with professional efficiency. It was perfect. The wolf inside her, that fractured, half-formed thing that had never quite fit in either skin, stirred with something like contentment. Here, in the rhythm of strike and parry, block and counter, she could channel the restless energy that had nowhere else to go. Her body remembered the movements her mother had taught her before the exile, before everything fell apart. Muscle memory was kinder than the other kind. The guards began to respect her. Not because she was the king's mate, they were careful never to mention that, but because she bled alongside them, bruised alongside them, and never once asked for mercy she hadn't earned. Lucan watched from the sidelines, his white fur stark against the gray stone. Sometimes he'd shift and join in the cool-down stretches, his small human form mimicking Selara's movements with endearing seriousness. The guards doted on their prince, but it was Selara he stayed close to, Selara whose approval he sought with every successful tumble and play fight. The pack was claiming her through him. She could feel it happening, the casual greetings in corridors, the invitations to meals she no longer took alone, the way conversations no longer stopped when she entered a room. They were weaving her into their fabric, stitch by invisible stitch, until one morning she realized she knew everyone's names and they knew hers. It terrified her. Because somewhere between the training and the meals and Lucan's nightmares that she soothed with whispered stories, Selara had started to feel something she'd sworn she'd never feel again. The treacherous warmth of belonging. The dangerous comfort of being wanted. She loved the cub. That truth had crept up on her slowly, but now it sat in her chest undeniable and huge. Loved his resilience, his gentle heart, the way he trusted her so completely it made her want to be worthy of it. And Rican. That was more complicated. More terrifying. She watched him with the guards, firm but fair. Watched him with Lucan, patient and affectionate despite the weight of kingdoms on his shoulders. Watched him watch her across crowded rooms, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes holding storms of things unsaid. The mate bond pulled at her constantly now, a tide she couldn't fight forever. But accepting it meant accepting vulnerability. Meant trusting that this safety wouldn't evaporate like morning frost. Meant believing she deserved to be chosen, not just tolerated. And that was the one thing Selara's battered heart still couldn't do. So she trained harder, pushed her body until exhaustion drowned out thought, and pretended she didn't notice the way Rican's gaze followed her like gravity. Rican found her in the training yard at dusk, when the guards had dispersed and the snow had started falling in earnest. Selara was running drills alone, her breath misting in the frozen air, her body moving through forms that had become meditation. She felt him arrive, that impossible presence impossible to ignore, but didn't stop. "You're going to injure yourself." His voice carried across the empty yard, calm but edged with something sharper. I heal fast. Selara drove her blade through an imaginary opponent's guard, pivoted, struck again. That's not the point. Then what is? She spun to face him, the practiced sword loose in her grip. Because if you're here to tell me I should rest, or eat, or any of the other things people keep suggesting, you can save your breath. Riken stood at the yard's edge, snowflakes catching in his dark hair, his expression carved from stone and patience. I'm here to ask why you're still running when you haven't left the fortress in 6 weeks. The words hit like a blade between the ribs. Selara's grip tightened on her sword. I'm not running. You're terrified. He moved closer, each step deliberate. You train until you collapse. You take every night watch with Lucan even when he's sleeping peacefully. You've memorized every exit in this fortress, cataloged every weakness in our defenses. You're preparing for the moment everything falls apart because you don't believe it won't. Smart, considering my track record. Her voice came out sharper than intended. People like me don't get happy endings. We get used until we're not useful anymore, then discarded. People like you. Riken's jaw clenched. You mean half-shifters? Outcasts? Or just people who've been hurt so many times they've forgotten what it feels like to be wanted? Selara flinched. Don't what? Tell you the truth. He was close now, close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes, feel the mate bond crackling between them like lightning waiting to strike. The bond isn't a prison, Selara. It's not fate forcing you into a role you don't want. It's a choice. My choice. Your choice. You don't know what you're choosing. The words tore out of her, raw and desperate. I'm broken. I've been broken so many times there's nothing left that's whole. The moment you see that, really see it, you'll realize you made a mistake. That your son deserves better. That your pack deserves better. My son loves you. Riken's voice dropped, rough with emotion. My pack respects you. And he stopped, drew a breath. I chose you the moment I saw you dying in the snow, cradling Lucan like he was worth more than your own life. Not because of the bond. Because of who you are. Selara shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. People always say that. Until they don't. Then let me prove it. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. Not because fate demands it. Because I'm asking. Choose me, Selara. Choose Lucan. Choose this family we're trying to build. And if you truly can't, then I'll let you go. No bonds, no obligations. My word as Alpha King. The practiced sword fell from her nerveless fingers. And if I fail you, she whispered. If I'm not enough, then we fail together. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, achingly gentle. That's what partnership means. Something inside Selara cracked. Something that had been holding back a flood. The mating ceremony took place under the full moon, in the fortress's ancient courtyard where generations of Alpha Kings had bound themselves to their chosen mates. Selara stood in the circle of standing stones, dressed in ceremonial silks the color of fresh snow, and tried to remember how to breathe. The entire pack had gathered, hundreds of wolves in human form, their eyes reflecting moonlight, their collective presence a weight that should have felt suffocating, but somehow didn't. Because Lucan stood beside her, his small hand clasped in hers, his face solemn with the importance of the moment. And Riken stood across from her, magnificent in his formal robes, his storm-gray eyes holding nothing but certainty. The pack's eldest elder raised her hands, calling for silence. We gather to witness the binding of Alpha King Riken Thaler to his chosen mate, Selara Whifford. Half-shifter, survivor, savior of the heir. Do any challenge this union? Selara's heart hammered. This was it, the moment someone would stand and say what she'd always known. That she wasn't worthy. That she didn't belong. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "We claim her as pack." Another voice joined it. "We claim her as kin." More voices, a rising chorus. "We claim her. We claim her. We claim her." Selara's vision blurred. Riken's hand found hers across the space between them, warm and steady and sure. The elder smiled. Then let the vows be spoken. Riken spoke first, his voice carrying across the courtyard. I vow to choose you every day in every way. To stand beside you, not above you. To build a kingdom where outcasts become family, where broken things are treasured, where no one is ever discarded for being different. His grip tightened. I vow to love you, Selara, not because fate demands it, but because I choose it. Today and always. Selara's throat closed. She looked at Lucan, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Riken. When she spoke, her voice shook, but the words were true. I vow to stop running. To trust that this bus is real. To choose you and Lucan, to choose this pack, to choose the family I never thought I'd have. A tear slipped down her cheek. I vow to be your partner, your equal, your mate. Not because I'm perfect, but because you've shown me that broken doesn't mean worthless. The bond ignited between them, no longer tentative but blazing, complete. The elder bound their joined hands with silk cord the color of moonlight and declared them mated before the pack and the gods. Riken pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Welcome home, Luna. Lucan crashed into them both, wrapping his arms around their legs, and the pack erupted in celebration, howls rising to the moon, voices singing ancient songs of unity and belonging. For the first time in her life, Selara didn't flinch from the noise, didn't calculate escape routes or brace for betrayal. She simply stood there, surrounded by her mate and her son and her pack, and let herself believe. She was home. She was chosen. She was enough. And she would spend the rest of her days making sure no one in their territory ever felt the way she once had, alone, unwanted, convinced they had to survive on their own. The half-shifter had become Luna. The outcast had become queen. And the broken girl who thought she'd die alone in the snow had found her family at last. Did Selara's journey from outcast to Luna capture your heart? If you loved watching a broken half-shifter find her place beside an alpha king and his traumatized cub, share this story with someone who believes in second chances and families forged in blood and choice. Want more stories of fierce heroines, protective alphas, and the bonds that can't be broke? Follow for more wolf-shifter romances where the outcasts become queens and love is always worth fighting for. Comment below, what was your favorite moment? Was it Selara's last stand protecting Lucan, the mate bond revelation, or the moment the pack claimed her as their own? Your support means everything. Like, share, and let me know what story you want to see next. Because every broken soul deserves a home. Every outcast deserves to be chosen. And every reader deserves a story that makes them believe in hope again.